American dream. It meant that it had a feel of safety to it too, that that all was good with the world, you know, at least, you know, until the Depression hit, certainly. But again, the point being that we really have not changed the way we landscaped in the United States since this period of time. So saying that, you know, we're talking about the lawn and what the lawn represents. And in America, American lawns cover an area larger, 3 times larger than any irrigated crop in the United States. So we are truly, first and foremost, turf grass farmers in this country. And even more so than regular old farmers that raise corn or wheat or whatever. We have a love affair with this turf. And so if we took all that turf, we could pretty much cover the state of Texas in our country with all the lawn that we have. So that begs the question, so what? Why does that even really matter? Well, it matters mostly because of resources. Turf grass uses a tremendous amount of water. And if you kind of added that all up, there is about 9 billion gallons of water used every day for outdoor irrigation in the United States. Now here's all of us sitting here in the middle of winter going, I'm not irrigating anything, everything's frozen. But in general, because there are areas of the country that are very warm and still trying to get that turf grass to grow. And why does it use so much water? Well, because the roots are extremely shallow with turf grass, and there is just a lot of runoff and a lot of evaporation. So we have to keep that water coming to keep the green the way that we like it. So another way that we get the green on turf grass is through fertilizer, and then spreading some pesticides and things as well to keep it healthy. But, you know, health is kind of relative. So we're looking at about 3 million tons of fertilizer annually and about 30,000 tons of pesticides. So that is a lot of extra stuff that's put on a crop, if you will, that gets a lot of water that ends up running off. So that's how we tend to get a lot of fertilizer and toxins in our streams, which eventually, you know, will lead into Lake Erie. So that's something to consider too when you're considering what type of landscape you want to have. And then there's taking care of that turf grass. And so now you're talking mowers, you're talking, you know, just any kind of gas-powered thing that you might use on your lawn. And so now we're looking at about 800 million gallons of gasoline each year that we use. So just to give you an idea, the Exxon Valdez, when it did its spill, it was only 11 million gallons. So we're using so much fossil fuel on this particular type of turf grass landscape. Now that's, again, not to say that, I mean, everybody has garden beds and all that kind of stuff, but in general, especially in suburban areas and even rural areas, there's plenty of large expanse of lawn. So I'm here to tell you tonight that there is some good news, that we can do things a little differently. And, you know, I'm not here to say, you know, completely get rid of your lawn, because you need to have a yard that's functional for you. You know, I'm a sort of fairly new grandma of twins, and my twins live on my street. And you know what? They love to play in my backyard. And so I do have lawn for them to play on. And I don't have I've lessened that amount, but I still have plenty to use for good old-fashioned play with family and friends. So let's start here. Just, I might be preaching to the choir a little bit here, but let's talk a little bit about, so what is considered native when you're talking about native plants? Turf grass, of course, is not a native plant, and there are plenty of other plants that we use in beds to beautify our houses and our areas that are not native as well. But let's talk about what that word native means. So we're talking about a species that was basically indigenous to the region that we live in prior to European settlement, so about 350 years ago. So many people ask me, so, okay, if it was before European settlement, how do we know what these species were? Well, there's lots of ways. First of all, when Europeans came to this country, they certainly met native people and learned about plants through them. We know from journals and written journals and picture journals that were kept by early settlers. We also know through the folks that were sent over here specifically to look at the plants, look what was offered by this new country, and they took samples back to Europe with them. So there are plenty of documentation to show what was here before things were brought by European settlers and others. And also a native is considered to be something that is open pollinated. So in other words, it is not a plant that needs to be has been manipulated in any way for some kind of specific trait. So it's not a plant that was manipulated for, said, okay, I want this to be a different color, so I'm going to manipulate it to be different color. Then it's not open pollinated, where bees and butterflies or birds just come in and mix the genes around. That is a process that's basically used by humans to manipulate things for different color, different size, different leaf shape, all of that. So pure natives have really, really high genetic diversity. So I can tell you all I want about what a native is, but I feel like the most important thing I want to share with you is why. Why are native plants so important? And I think of it in three ways, my 3 E's. They're environment, economics, and ethics. So environment includes things like stormwater control, and that's also economic as well, because plants will do the work of pulling stormwater down deep into the soil, and they do that for free. So because many of their roots are so deep, it allows for that water to percolate and filter through those and along those really, really deep root paths. And then because they can go so deep down into the soil, you really don't need to worry about, putting them on steroids by putting, fertilizers all over the soil. And you certainly don't need to put pesticides on, because then that would negate helping the pollinators and different creatures that are coming to your plants. So without some of those fertilizers and pesticides in the runoff, we're getting better water quality as well. And as I just mentioned, the resources are minimized with native plants because you really don't need fertilizers, you don't need pesticides. I'm not going to say zero watering, because when you're starting your garden, you might need, to get things started and established, you might need to do some watering. I will, closer to the end of my presentation, I will show you some other options for your lawn. So you could have plant some plants that could reduce or just negate mowing. Okay, and then that reduces the maintenance time you need to spend in your yard as well. You can just hang out and enjoy. And so the less fertilizers and pesticides and mowing you need to use, that's good for your bottom line as well as for the environment. And then habitat creation, I kind of use this as an ethical thing, I think. We're here to live in community, not only with other folks, but with the creatures and wildlife and plants around us. So as you establish a native garden, if you build it, they will definitely come. You will see birds, mammals, you'll see reptiles, amphibians, you'll see lots of pollinators and all sorts of things that see your yard as a haven for them to live successfully. And it's not only above the soil, it's also below the soil. These deep roots keep all that subsoil habitat for all those little invertebrates, just keeps them happy, keeps them healthy, especially because they're not trying to filter through fertilizers and pesticides as well. And it just kind of, I think, creates a sense of place. You know, if I woke up tomorrow and there were palm trees and saguaro cactuses outside my window, I would know I am not in Greater Cleveland, right? So I think having these plants around you just helps you understand where you live and how it has looked for a very, very long time. So now we get to the P's. I have 4 P's that I want to share with you. And this will really help you understand just what establishing native plants with native seed is all about. So let's get to our first P. The first P is prep. And what I mean by that is prepping the bed where you're going to plant the seed. I cannot say this enough. Prepping the bed is so important. Okay, I'm going to say it again. Prepping your bed is so, so important. I mean, we are happy to sell you seed, but we also really want you to be successful. We do not want you to waste your money. And when you do order seed, a lot of the things I'm talking about tonight, you'll get a sheet of paper that comes with your seed that'll tell you all of this great stuff. And there's also tons of resources about bed prep and maintenance on our website. So that's always another great place to go. So when I say prep your bed, and I'm really kind of talking here mostly about, you know, a smaller type garden. If you're thinking I have, you know, an acre to 10 acres to 20 acres I want to turn into native plants, what I would suggest you do is call us and talk to a gentleman named Dave to talk you through how to do a very large scale project. But if you're looking to, you know, do corners of your yard or a nice, even, you know, pretty large bed to a pretty small little pocket place, here's your ticket. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I really do not enjoy digging up turf grass. So if there's especially an area of turf grass that you want to take out of commission, this is a great way to create a bed. If you have a bed already in place that you want to sort of redo with native plants, you still need to have at least, you know, areas that are free of weeds or other plants that could be competition with your seed. Okay, so you can certainly do that by hand and pull things out. But what I will say is, do not till. Don't say, oh, I'm going to get this tiller out, I'm going to get my shovels out, and I'm just going to turn all of this over. Don't disturb the soil quite that much if you're not going to do the way I'm going to tell you about in a second, or that's on the screen right now. Because as soon as you start digging in and tilling up, Now you have disturbed a huge seed bed, especially of weed seeds and things that are just hanging out in your soil, waiting to get disturbed and kick themselves into gear. So tilling is definitely not the way to go. But this, what you're seeing on the screen right now, is a really great way where you just use, you know, layers of newspaper or corrugated cardboard. You put it down over an area, then you cover that area with about 2 to 3 inches of wood chips or hardwood mulch. Double shredded hardwood mulch is awesome. It can be, I know we've even done test plots with, it seems like they dye mulch now all the time. I don't know why, but they do. It still works in that. The only thing I would say is there are some mulches now that are being sold that contain herbicide in the mulch. So that would definitely not work, because that herbicide would really do a number on the seeds you're trying to get started. So just look for plain old wood mulch. And then you just seed directly into that mulch. And you don't want to dig seed in. You just kind of want to sprinkle it on top and kind of tickle it in with your fingers or a leaf rake, you know, just to make sure that the seed has really, really good contact with the soil or that hardwood mulch. And then if you want to put in some kind of hardscape border or some kind of border, then that is up to you and your particular design view for your yard. Now, when I say sprinkle in the seed, one of the things that we offer is when you see, let's see, it would be on your left, is those are iris seeds, and they're all in that kind of just sort of tan looking stuff. So what those are rice hulls. So that is the chaff that is left over after rice is harvested and removed. That little, you know, kernel or whatever is removed from that hard outer covering. So these rice hulls, they're very light. And if you're trying to, you know, iris seed is pretty big, but let's say you buy cardinal flower seed, which is tiny, 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 tiny seed. This way you'll make sure you don't overseed in one area. You get your rice hulls, you put your seeds in there, you mix it all up. And then as you can see on your right, this is where I seeded on top of that hardwood mulch. And I can see where I've been. And it also helps make your seed go a little bit farther. So you can also use sand. If you do use sand, I would not use play sand. I would use more of like a contractor sand. It doesn't, play sand will kind of clump up if it gets too wet. But the rice hulls we have found have made a really, really great seeding medium. And they're not expensive. They're very inexpensive to purchase when you purchase your seed. So when do you seed? When is the best time to seed? Well, actually right now is not a bad time at all. If you want to seed in the spring, you can do that. You have to, I would really wait until the ground is kind of thawed and then probably not seed after about June 15th. And the reason we would say that is you do want to make sure that your plant has enough time to get to sprout and get some good root establishment. Whether you're seeding or whether you're buying native plants, like from a plant sale or a garden center, if you are a native plant, the most important thing you do as soon as you hit the ground and start to grow is establish roots. What happens above ground is not very important to native plants right off the bat. It's all about the roots, because it is not easy living in Northern Ohio, and you better get your feet in, and you better get your feet deep so that you are well established to get water and nutrients as best you can. And maybe punch through some of that lovely clay soil we all have. If you do seed in the spring, there are some plants that you can seed, but they still won't sprout until after they have had a cold treatment. So that is what we would call dormant seeding. So you really need to wait, and there are many native seeds that need to have that stratification or that cold snap in order for them to break the seed coat and actually sprout. So that would be after soil temperatures are below 50 degrees. So I usually just sort of say to folks, you need to wait till at least mid-November, at least up here. And then, so right before that real freeze and thaw sort of cycle begins. A third option, and that's why I say you can do this now, is frost seeding. So even though the ground has frozen, so from about the beginning of that, so into December, until, early spring, when the ground is constantly freezing and thawing, as the name suggests, you can spread seed then. I just spread seed a couple of weeks ago in my yard. And the freeze thaw is awesome because it really helps work the seed down into the soil. It does that all for you. And you'll still get those stratification requirements, or those cold requirements that the seed must have in order to break dormancy in the spring. You can actually seed on a dusting of snow if you want. I mean, not if there's 3 inches or 12 feet, right? But if there's like a little dusting and you want to sprinkle the seed on that, when it thaws, it'll take it down deep into the soil for you. So lots and lots of opportunity to seed throughout the year. Really, the time I probably would not do a lot of seeding is around, late June, July, August, September. Those, you just might not have great success if you're doing it then. So the second P is patience. This is a hard word sometimes for gardeners, I think, is because even though we know when spring hits, it's like, well, you can't just start full in gardening when we know we still might have another snowfall, right? Sometimes, but we're so anxious to get our hands dirty. But what I especially mean by patience is whether you're doing seed, especially if you're doing seed, but even if you're planting the actual plant, but especially if you're doing seed, you need to have some very clear expectations. So, and it does depend on the site, but typically what you'll get if you plant native annuals, you will get bloom your first year. Perennials, you will probably have green growth and not any bloom or much bloom. Then, as you would expect, if you do, seed a biennial, you won't get your bloom till the second year. And when you're seeding perennials, I say you won't bloom till the third year, but you'll probably get bloom the second year. But the third year is really when things start to come into their own, and you just, it's like, there it is. It's really going strong. Because I will say I seeded, when I seeded milkweed and I seeded beard tongue, there were some things I seeded that they came in really strong the second year. So I think I just, they liked where I put them. And they just came on like gangbusters. So, but just kind of keep that idea that this is something that is going to progress over time. It is not an instantaneous process, but I will tell you, it is well worth the wait. So my third P is persistence. And what, so far these peas seem very unexciting, don't they? They just really, they're like, well, what do you, prep, patience, persistence. I don't want to do all those things, right? But again, these are things that you would probably think on for any type of garden. So what I really mean by persistence is if anybody tells you a native garden is a no maintenance garden, they are lying to you. There's no such thing as a no maintenance garden. You know, you'll still have to go in, especially, you know, if you're, especially if you're seeding a seed mix where everything is jumbled up together and not seeding individual species. You know, you'll need to kind of watch. And if there are some undesirable things that are starting to come up, you know, pluck those out and make sure that you kind of keep the competition low for your little native sprouts coming up. It is really important to start with a sterile medium. And if you do that mulch idea, that shredded hardwood mulch is pretty sterile stuff. So that's why we don't say use topsoil or something like that, that can have that seed bank in it. So if you start to get some stuff coming in that, you know, it's probably the same old stuff that you're always trying to get out of your garden, whether it's the gill over the ground or dandelions or whatever, you can physically remove those, or depending on where you fall, if it's something that's really hard to remove, you know, if you want to, you could spot herbicide, but certainly not a general spray. And you know, you might have some species that are in your yard that you just, you know, maybe cut the heads off before they can spread. We all know there are some species that are very, very hard to eradicate depending on what your yard looks like. And sometimes the best you can do is to stop them from seeding anymore. So you will have to be a little persistent. You will need to make sure you kind of keep that competition down and, you know, do your due diligence with some weeding. And the last P is patio chair. This is why you do this, so you can sit back with your beverage of choice and enjoy this beautiful, beautiful yard that you've created. And you can watch all those birds, all those pollinators, all those critters come and enjoy it as well. So those are the 4 Ps. Prep. All of a sudden I blanked out on my own 4 Ps. Prep. Persistence. Oh my gosh, I just like went blank on the second one. Patio chair. Okay, so those were our Ps. Now I had that weird little logo right in the beginning. I said we're going to talk about logos, and I had the Amazon one. The thing that's hardest about this Zoom is I can't chit chat with all of you throughout this whole presentation, but I'm going to guess that when I show you this, you guys know who this is. You know what this logo is. So this is Flo from Progressive Insurance. This is her little sort of logo face that sometimes Progressive Insurance puts on things. So what do logos have to do with native plants? So let's talk a little bit about this. I don't know if you've heard the word nativar, but some people have used that in their writing and their teaching. There's a little garden center not far, well, actually it's out of business now, unfortunately. There's this garden center not far from my home, just not one of the big chains, just a little, you know, mom and pop one. So I tried to give them my business as much as possible. And they had some natives, but I went there one day. And so on your left is, you know, purple-headed coneflower, just your classic Echinacea purpurea on your left. So then I went to the garden center, and the pictures on your right all of those were called Echinacea purpurea. So they were still called purple coneflower, but it was variety, blah, 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 whatever, you know, fun name they put to it. So here's my little pitch to you about nativars is, so a nativar being a native plant that then is not open pollinated like we talked about before, but it is manipulated by folks for a certain characteristic. And you can see in the two nativar photos, one of them was manipulated to get lots and lots of those side petals, you know, lots and lots of ray flowers or petals. And then the other one was manipulated so that the center portion or the disc flowers were very, very, you know, foofy and fluffy and kind of really different looking from the actual native. So here's the question about nativars is, well, let me put it this way, as from the idea of a logo. Let's say you are going on a trip and, you know, you're on the freeway, you're bopping along, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm really, really hungry. And you think, oh, there's got to be, let's say, a McDonald's here somewhere. So you're bopping along and all of a sudden, you know, off the side, you see a big sign, and it has this big black triangle on it. And you're like, huh, I don't know what that is. I'm just going to keep going. So you're still pretty hungry. And you bop along some more and you see another big sign. It has a black triangle on it. And you're like, huh, there's that logo again. I don't know what that is. I've never seen that before. Well, what if all of a sudden McDonald's changed their logo to a black triangle instead of the golden arches? You would have no idea that even though you're hungry, you just passed two restaurants because the logo got changed. When I think of this purple coneflower on your left, that is sort of the logo. That's the norm. That's what the bees and the butterflies and all the other pollinators have known for centuries. That's the logo they know. So nativars are kind of like logos that got changed. And I'm not saying a pollinator will never go to those flowers, but it's not the norm. It's not what they know, especially in terms of color. And bees and other insects see in different color wavelengths than we do. So even though one might still look purple to us, it might not look purple to them. So what they have known their whole life, what they have evolved with, what they have adapted to is now all of a sudden changed. The other thing that, you know, I think there's still research being done is if, let's say, you have a purple coneflower and you say, oh, I love the flower, but I want it to have really big leaves. Well, think about all the energy that new native or nativar is going to put into those leaves. If it puts a lot of energy into those leaves, how much energy is left then to put into pollen production or nectar production? So how does the changing of these genes affect the way all the other parts of the plant work? So I always like to share that and say, you know, think about that when you're looking for natives. I would encourage you to go straight native and not nativar. But again, that's a call that you have to make as a gardener, for sure, and what your goal is. I absolutely love to show this example of what a native yard can do for the environment and for the critters that live around us that are struggling, many of them that are struggling. And this was back, oh gosh, I think these folks did this back in the early 2000s. This was Tony Stahl and Mark Appelstadt. They are National Wildlife Federation habitat ambassadors. And this is their house in Columbus. So on your left, this is the little bungalow type house they moved into in a Columbus suburb. You can see the lawn, you can see the one tree, you can see the, you know, there's certainly some flowering plants in the front. So they moved in, and over 5 years, I think it was, they said, we are going to turn our yard into completely native plants. Now I get, and that's what you see on the right. And that might not be your style, the way that looks right now, but still, clearly, they really went native. So over that period of time, what Tony and Mark did was they did surveys in their yard. And this is just a 50 foot by 100 foot lot. This is not a big house. If I remember correctly, it wasn't far from the Olentangy River, but just in a, you know, Columbus suburb. So when they first moved in, there were 3 native plants in their yard. They saw 2 species of butterfly, you know, over a season. They saw 13 other kinds of insects, a couple of species of birds, and it had some mammals that wandered through. After that 5 years, they had 113 different species of native plants in their yard. That's a lot. That's really a lot, but still. Over that time, they counted 33 species of butterflies, 51 species of other insects, 37 species of birds in their little tiny suburban lot. And they said, I remember when I saw their presentation, they had this cool picture, an aerial view of their street. And you could see that their neighbors were just sort of, you know, house and grass, house and grass, house and grass. And then there was their yard, and it was just like, bam, you know, I mean, if I was a bird, I'd be going, oh my God, that's where I want to hang out. They had a lot of neotropical migrants that came to rest in their yard. They said it was great. And the number of mammals they had also went up. Now, I've had many people say, I don't want more mammals in my yard. What are those mammals, you know? But remember, if you've got more birds, and they probably, you know, maybe had some other just reptiles or amphibians, some of those mammals might have been taken care of by some of the birds, but it wasn't anything that they said was bad. You know, they still had a great time watching it all. So, you know, when people say, does it really work? Does putting native plants in my yard really make a difference? Does it really help anything? And wholeheartedly, my answer is yes, it makes a big difference. And I've always thought this was a great example. I mentioned early on that in terms of turf grass and things like that, there are other options than the way we even do our lawns. And on the bottom row, you'll see something called Freedom Lawn. And this is basically, these are not native grasses, these are fescues. Freedom Lawn 1 is a cool fescues, which are cool season grasses, and it also has some annual rye in it. And the thing about our Freedom Lawn mix is that these are types of fescues that don't grow, very tall. So they kind of, you know, will come up and then kind of bend over. So you don't really need to mow. I mean, you should always check what your city ordinances are and make sure that, you know, you're not breaking some ordinance law. But honestly, my sort of expertise or with all of this lawn stuff, especially, and any native planting, is it's pretty much in cities complaint driven. So I always encourage people to just talk to your neighbors and say, hey, I'm going to try something different, you know, and just let them know what's going on. So the Freedom Lawn 1 is fescues that are kind of bunch grasses, but it has this annual rye that'll just come in and give you something quick. But it can get a little, that rye can get a little tall. So some people don't want that. So they'll go to Freedom Lawn 2, which has those fescues, but then this one also has a little Kentucky bluegrass, which will stay sort of under the fescues. So if you really do want to mow and you kind of like that turfy look, you can mow high and the Kentucky bluegrass will make it really look, you know, grassy all the way down to the ground. And Freedom Lawn 3, that doesn't look like a really great picture, but that is strictly fescues only. There's nothing else in there but the fescues. And I will mention pretty much any one of these, if you wanted to put a wildflower component in it, you could absolutely do that, especially some of the native annuals, and that'll give you some color in between. Something new that we've been offering this year, end of last year, this year, are non-grass lawns. So here, one is a clover lawn mix. So you just get tons and tons of clover. The bee lawn is also clover. We worked with some folks who are telling us some of the best ways to feed bees other than large perennials and things like that. And the bee lawn is one of those. And then the flowering lawn mix does actually get a little bit taller, and it has some actual sort of perennials in it. They don't, it's not Joe Pye weed, 6 foot tall, but it would be a little more meadowy looking, but still short. So there's some other way different ways to do lawns than just grass. I definitely want to mention to you that April is Ohio Native Plant Month. And if you want to learn more about that, if you just put in Ohio Native Plant Month or .org, or if you just put Ohio Native Plant Month, and a wonderful website will come up with lots and lots of information about what that means. But we have partnered with them last year, and we're partnering again with the Ohio Native Plant Month organization. And we have developed with them an Ohio Native Plant Month pocket pollinator garden seed packet. And so that seed packet is one that'll cover about 200 to 250 square feet. It does have plants that need probably about 6 hours of sunlight a day. And it does have grasses in it. A couple has a little blue stem and autumn bent grass. It has some native annuals in it to give you that first punch of color. And then it has, probably 20 plus more native other perennials in it. So it is a great, great mix. And what the folks at Ohio Native Plant Month want to do is see how much area of lawn we can convert to native plant habitat in 2021. So if this is something you feel like would be fun to do, is to take out a portion of turfgrass lawn and turn it into a pocket pollinator garden, you could go to that website and report to them how many square feet of lawn you restored to native plant habitat. They're trying to keep track of that. So pretty cool. They have done great work in putting out information, and also said working with us on getting the garden seed packet ready. A seed packet is generally about $15. It's $15.95 again, and you get about 200 square feet covered. So it's a pretty good deal. So check that out, Ohio Native Plant Month. So let me end by, in my former life, before I retired, I was a naturalist. So I got to get my naturalist on and give a shout out to the whole idea of sharing what you do in your yard, especially with native plants and the critters and the pollinator, all those things that come to visit them, is sharing that with other people, and especially with children. So this looks like an old wooden spoon and an old slotted spoon, but I'm here to tell you that is not what they are. Those are digging tools. And one of our neighbors brought them over for my grandkids, and we have had great fun digging up all sorts of things in my yard and in their yard. So you don't need anything fancy, just anything at all. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is when you get things to come to your yard and you're like, oh my gosh, my milkweed's blooming and I have monarchs, is don't be afraid to go outside your comfort zone and really share in an interesting way a butterfly with someone that's important to you in their life, and especially a child. My grandkids still talk about this butterfly that I put on my face. And then when you can show others how important all of this is to you, then maybe they might go outside of their comfort zone and say, oh my goodness, look what I found. And they'll have enough courage to hold the toad or have the butterfly on their nose. Because, we're talking about something simple and small you can do in your own backyard, but we're also talking about something pretty big and that makes a difference to the planet. And all of the seeds in this little hand, they're more than just literal seeds. They are also figurative seeds that I really hope to plant in the psyche and the heart of the little kids in my life right now. So I hope you will take along someone with you on this journey of native plant gardening. And that's what I have to share with you for this evening. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and come back to you. And I am happy to, that was a lot, and it's really, really hard not to see all your faces when I'm talking to see if it's seemingly making sense or not. But I'm absolutely happy to take some questions. And I know Sarah said she had some information to share with you as well. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and we can chat.
Hi there. I do have a couple of questions, or I guess I'll start with one, and then if nobody else has questions, then I'll come back in later.
Okay.
I'm kind of attending both out of just personal interest, but my job at a museum, we started kind of building beds for pollinators as kind of an educational experience, and I'm kind of interested in the lawns in particular now, and maybe integrating those around the beds. When is the best time to seed for a lawn?
So I wouldn't do a lawn until things start like this spring, till the soil starts to warm up a little bit. Okay. Is when I would do that. I would not, try and do that right now. But one of the things I didn't mention, just as an aside, that we have new this year is a thing called bee mulch. So it's what that means is when you, like, especially around trees where you just kind of mulch around, you know, a big tree in your yard or something, we have, it's a really beautiful crimson clover, and then also partridge pea, which is a native annual that you can put in these little mulch areas that sometimes get forgotten about, you know, and it can still be really pollinator friendly. So, but I would wait, yes, I would wait and do this when the soil starts to warm up a little bit. And then you can, you know, do any one of those. And like I said, it kind of depends on the look you're going for, but especially for the museum, since you have the public coming in and around and all of that, if there's a special look you're going for and you want to talk that through with somebody, I would just call us. And Dave is the name of the guy who does a lot of the, you know, talking with folks to get them what would really work best for them. But you have time for that now. You don't have to do that right now.
Okay. And then can I ask you kind of a side question with that? I'm kind of thinking about it for my own personal property. Our neighbors that we have are very particular about their lawns. And in fact, like one, it looks like a professional, like almost like a golf course, you know, it's like pristine.
Right. Yeah.
I'm a little concerned, one, about, you know, having my yard go into his yard, like with the,
right.
the pollinating the seeds and everything, but also I know that one of them in particular uses a lot of herbicides and fertilizers and things like that. I mean, would that leach into my yard, and you know, how could I best mitigate that?
Right.
And maybe that's a question for Dave too, since he sounds like a lawn guy.
He's yeah, I mean, he's great in, like, especially speccing things out, and he's, you know, has a lot of project experience especially. But what I would say about that though is, indeed, you know, depending on what kind of fertilizer they use and how it's put on, I mean, things can always waft through the air, certainly. In terms of pesticides and all of that, absolutely. You know, again, depending on how it's applied, there could be things that come over into your yard, but I would not let that deter you from having a native yard at all. You know, I think because you're not the person putting it on, if there's a little draft that brings it over, well, then there's a little draft that brings it over. But, and maybe there's a way to plant, I'm thinking of maybe like some kind of living screen of some kind that might hit it first before it came to a lot of perennials, non-woody plants, forbs. That is a hard question, and that's why I said sometimes it's important to either talk to neighbors, or maybe don't just all of a sudden one year like go, bam, I'm all native, and it's like you just shocked them because now there's this jungle next to them. And you know, just kind of do things a little at a time. But if ever, I will say, if everything's really pristine, you know, they might not like it very much. But again, your design also doesn't, you know, native does not have to mean messy. It does not, you know, it does not have to look like, you know, the prairie of Western days. You know, you can still have, you know, individual clumps of plants. You can have areas where things are very diverse, and it doesn't have to look, you know, like your, you know, little shop of horrors in your backyard, right? You know, so although I will say I am a firm believer that everyone needs a plant in their backyard that is not woody, but is taller than they are. So, you know, those are the ones that people think are going to eat their little dog at night. Like, this plant comes alive and it's just like, wow, you know. but, you know, put that Joe Pye, put that cup plant, put that, you know, just big thing in your yard that just looks awesome. I just think that's great. But I want to make sure we have more questions, but the lawn thing, I actually, that you brought that up, is I have every intention of changing my lawn in my yard. And I keep thinking, like, should I go to the city and try to encourage them to actually put natural landscaping ordinances in our charter and alternative lawn ordinances in our charter? Or should I just, you know, I have really cool neighbors, so I think they'll think it's really neat. But, you know, there's always a question about that, you know, just about, as long as you don't get over stuff too, you know, grass that's too high, I feel like people are probably all okay. But maybe a little at a time.
Thank you.
Sure, good questions, good questions. Anybody else have any questions?
There's one in the chat.
Oh, I have to look at the chat. Okay. Okay, I see some stuff about putting cedars along the back of your property, and you have buckthorn growing there now. What? Did I just make a face? Buckthorn is so tough. I'm kind of thinking back to my park days when I worked for the park and we wanted to, you know, curtail some buckthorn. Honestly, I would say we just kept cutting it back, just keep cutting it back and cutting it back, and maybe even like treating the stumps a little bit. And eventually it did wane, that's for sure. So, I mean, I guess I would probably at least spend one season just cutting back and staying on it so it can't, you know, there isn't leaf growth to really, really feed everything down below. And then try to maybe plant some cedar after you've gotten a little bit of a handle on how dense, however dense the growth might be. I hope that answers your question. Buckthorn's a tough one, man. That is a real tough one. Anybody else? Who has native plants in their yard right now? Raise your hands. Yay, good. I love to hear that. I love to see it. Very nice, very nice. Well, you guys have been awesome. Thank you so much for listening. And again, you can always reach out to us. Our website has so much information on it. I also write many of the blogs that are on our website, and so if you want to follow us on Facebook or Instagram too, I tend to go through some of these things I talked about tonight as well, on sort of on a seasonal basis, how to do this or how to do that. And keep that Ohio Native Plant Month in your head. It's a great time to get started and a great thing to share with other folks that live around you. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Barb.
You're very welcome.
If anybody has any questions about the People's Garden or OCS, I'd love to answer any questions.
Everybody has a lot of books at their house. I love seeing all your books. I do see something in chat. Are there natives in the OCS garden?
I know that there's some cone flowers in the OCS garden now. I do have some of OPN's seed mixes that I'm super excited to start seeding. I didn't know that you could seed, I guess now, maybe like after the snow goes away, but I
Right.
will probably start doing that. And then somebody from Cleveland actually gave me some of her seeds that she collected from her native
Mhm.
garden. And
Yeah.
I've been looking up best times to start seeding those. They did mention that, or they have both swamp milkweed and then
Mhm.
the butterfly weed too.
Right.
And one of them, I probably should have asked this, but one of them was saying that the swamp milkweed, or maybe it was a butterfly one, has to go through that dormancy period. Um, and they were saying that maybe instead of like putting it out this early, just putting it in the fridge for a couple weeks. I don't know if you have any experience doing that.
Yeah, you can, the fridge is kind of an interesting idea. You could give that a try. I wouldn't, I wouldn't probably wet it so much. You just got to make sure they don't get moldy or anything like that. That isn't terribly helpful. Some seed doesn't care if it's moldy or not, but most of the milkweeds do need that cold period. Some of them, need 3 months. Some of them, need a shorter period of time. The great thing about putting it outside is that it gets wet, and it gets just in the right place in the soil. So even rather than putting them in the fridge, I'd still just go ahead and try to get them out now, as long as your bed, again, is prepped.
Okay.
If you have a good place to put them that doesn't have, that is bare soil or bare mulch and doesn't have a lot of competition, then you should be good to go.
There's a very specific, I guess, plot of land that's at the garden that's on a slope. There's a bike
Mm-hmm.
trail, and then it's on the, I think that's on the north facing side. Oh no, it's on the south facing side of the building. Um,
Okay.
but it gets a lot of sun, but
Okay.
the soil is really, really clay like and very
Okay.
difficult. And there's some asparagus, I think, going into its second year there, that
Okay.
didn't do anything. And I tried planting a lot of peppers, and the sunflowers were there last year,
Mm-hmm.
but that bed is not good at all. And I'm wondering what else I can do to maybe prep it. I was just
Mm-hmm.
mostly I just do compost and then just kind of like till it a little bit. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if there's a better way to prep it, and if so, like if that would be a good spot to do natives as well, because it's right next to the bike trail. I think it would be a really good spot.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering like how if there's like a certain soil requirement too for some of the natives.
The beauty of natives is that they're sort of been there, done that, like they know that, guess what, there's a bunch of clay here. I'm not saying every native loves clay, but, and we actually just, I think it was last year at OPN, and you can check it out on the website, actually did a mix that was like a clay buster mix,
Okay.
especially plants that, will do better in that clay type of situation. But, I think what you're doing sounds great. Compost is a wonderful amendment. Absolutely. And then, like I said, you got to be a little careful with the whole tilling thing a little bit, but, you need to obviously work that compost in somewhat. But, I think you're doing the right thing. I think you're, trying to get it a little bit, allowing the compost to get it a little more crumbly or friable, and then you can just seed, right into that. But really, the native plants are pretty great with clay because some of their roots are just, we're talking with larger plants, some of them we're talking 12, 15 feet deep with
Wow.
roots.
Wow.
So they're going deep to get their nutrients in their water and carry water all that far down.
Wow.
So, so you're doing good.
Cool.
I think you're doing good.
Would you have any recommendations for planting specific types of natives alongside your vegetables? Like I'm also hoping to like intersperse some natives. And I have some big blue stem. I have, I forget some of the other ones that I have, but I was hoping to just kind of intersperse them throughout like the veggie, like
Sure.
raised beds, I guess.
Right. So if you're looking for things that maybe aren't, you know, like crazy tall, I mean, I always think, well, I'll give you an example, like the vegetable garden, and I have a big vegetable garden in my backyard. And I have natives, I have a water issue all along the back. So I have everything pretty close to my vegetable garden that is from, I have milkweed, I have evening primrose, I have gray-headed coneflower, I have rudbeckia or black-eyed Susan. What else do I have back there? Purple-headed coneflower. Trying to think what else. Because it's wet, I have obedient plant. And then really some of the native annuals like the, I mean, partridge pea is a legume, so that'll help fix nitrogen in your soil. So that's a great one. And it reseeds itself, although it can, you know, you don't want it to necessarily take over where your vegetables are. But the blanket flower is just beautiful. And like I said, it's an annual, so it will reseed itself, but you know, it's not, it's kind of, I always feel like it's a little more forgiving if you're like, oh my gosh, I mean, we've all put plants in the wrong place, right? Where I'm like, oh my God, why did they, I have foxglove beard tongue that I was just like, why, this is the front of my bed and why did it grow to be 5 feet tall? You know, I don't know. It loved it there. So I think another great plant that I love that doesn't get too crazy tall is like sneezeweed. Helen's flower is a really great little plant. If you want something that looks like, that is more of a border grass, and you think, well, what good is a grass? But grasses are great for pollinators as well, because they love to hide in them and they love to hang out in them. And prairie dropseed or spirobolus is a wonderful little bunch grass that just looks so good along a border. I will say another one of my favorite border type plants, we do not sell this seed, but I have purchased the plant, is Jacob's ladder. Does anybody else use that in their yard? Jacob's ladder is it's just a great border plant, and it gets like a purple little flower on it. It kind of cascades over with the leaves, and blooms pretty readily, pretty heavily as well. See, those are some of the ones that thinking that I have, especially near my vegetables. I think a lot of the asters would be awesome. A lot of asters would be great.
Sounds good. Does Lisa have a question? I see her hand is raised in her picture.
Hi, yes, I do have a question.
Okay.
It's about wild tobacco or native tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
I grew it a few times just because I was interested in what it would look like. And it has these pretty little yellow, almost like a snapdragon type flower.
Mm-hmm.
And tons of seeds. And apparently pests don't particularly like it. So I read that it was good to put around your garden, and also don't eat it. I don't know that much about it because I just grew it in a pot just to see what it come out like. But I mean, do people grow that normally? Because it is a beautiful plant, really.
You know, I will tell you, I'm not really familiar with that. I'm actually sitting here Googling it while you're talking, so I can.
I have a ton of seeds if you want some.
So I'm not real familiar with that one, but I mean, but what I would say is if, you know, if you've read good things about it, if it's behaving the way you wanted it to behave, and if it is helpful, it is certainly, I mean, I have never heard of it being, well, if it's, you know, we've heard of invasive plants. I mean, there are native plants that can be aggressive. Saying the word invasive and non-native invasive is a whole nother
Right.
ball of wax. But I really don't have a lot of experience with it. But if, you know what, if critters aren't eating it and it helps keep them out of your garden, then I'd say go for it. I haven't really heard, I'll have to look into it a little bit more.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that with everybody though, because maybe somebody, it is a cool looking plant.
Yeah, it is.
So pretty cool. I mean, I do get often get questions about, you know, deer resistant plants and what are native, you know, which native plants are more deer resistant and all of that. And, you know, personally, I don't believe in deer resistant plants because I've been burned way too many times. And I think, and I've also very, very clearly seen that, you know, the deer in my yard have different palates than the deer in your yard, and they might never touch a plant in my yard. And then I say, oh, plant this, and then they eat it to the ground in your yard, you know? So, I, you know, would usually just tell folks, you know, if you find something that works for you, then you should use it, especially in terms of deer. You know, I'm not going to tell you, oh, just plant trilliums, they'll be fine, because they probably won't. They're just candy, right? They're just candy to deer. But, you know, when you're first, if you do have a lot of deer pressure in your yard and you're really starting, especially by seed or by, you know, native plugs or something like that, you might need to put some sort of fencing or something up just to give them a chance, you know, really give them a chance to get a hold before they would get nibbled down. So you know your yard best. And you know, I don't have a lot of deer pressure in my yard, but I sure have rabbit pressure. I have a lot of bunnies just munching on everything in my yard. So, you know, I've had to do some creative things. So whatever works, huh? Oh, I see somebody says you've been growing dill and wild carrot for black swallowtails. I would keep doing it. I'd use the dill. I think the dill and fennel is great for that. I mean, I would, because dill and all of those herbs are great for you too, and for your cooking, I would just go ahead and use those tried and true herbs like that. I mean, certainly I'd have to honestly do a little bit of research on what a good native was, and I could always touch base with you on that. But, you know, most things in that particular family are black swallowtail. Just, you know, they give the same chemical makeup that the black swallowtail caterpillars need. But I mean, I planted a bunch of dill too. I did not get the caterpillars yet, but I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. So I'd stick with the dill and all of that. Can't go wrong. Let's see. Oh, so there's also, what do you tell people concerned about ticks in native yards. I think, honestly, there are, I've seen some studies where ticks are a lot more prevalent in some non-native situations than necessarily native situations. So, and I just think there are good years for ticks and years that are where there are less. So I would honestly tell somebody, basically not to worry about it. Like if you want a native yard, plant a native yard, and whether you have natives or not, if you find that you have a lot of ticks where you live, it's not really going to make that big of a difference, I don't think. Like I said, I've seen more research, some other research with how non-natives push out the natives, create these monocultures, and the ticks just love it. So I'd be a little more concerned about that. Well, you guys have been awesome. Thanks so much for spending time. Hopefully we'll be able to like actually see each other in the flesh one day, right? That would be great.
Thanks again, Barb.
Oh, you're so very welcome.
I'm really excited. I have a really hard time with the patience part in the garden. I think every winter I just get so antsy to want to get out there. But yeah, almost there.
You and me both. I know. You and me both, man. There are plenty of times I have been out there planting things or scraping in the soil, and my husband will say, "Hey, how come you're out there doing that when you see other people doing that?" Under your breath, you're going, "What are they doing? Why are the soil's not ready for that yet? You know, don't move your leaves yet. There's still creatures hibernating in them." You know, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes you just got to get your hands dirty, right?
Yeah.
Just got to get your hands dirty. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, again, thank you so much for asking me and having me. And please reach out to us if you have any other questions or something wasn't clear, and we'll talk you through it.
Great. Thank you so much again.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for showing up. It's really exciting.
All right. Bye, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.